advocacy risk to remain theoretical rather than practical. And in fact, it is difficult, if not impossible, to foster a genuine culture of competition relying solely on the endeavors of competition authorities. Therefore, it becomes essential to address the following challenges. How do we integrate pro-competitive thinking in policy making? How do we ensure that public authorities are well informed about competition principles and rules? And how do we build mechanisms that encourage them to address competitive concerns before the regulation is adopted or the competition distortion occurs? We will explore today these questions with our distinguished speakers. I should also note that today's panel composition is very interesting, and it brings together perspectives from different jurisdictions and institutional experiences. I'm confident that this diversity will lead to engaging and meaningful discussion. Allow me briefly introduce me and our distinguished speakers of today's panel session. My name is Shushan Sargsyan. I am member of Competition and Consumer Protection Commission of the Republic of Armenia. And I began my professional journey in the Commission within the legal department about 15 years ago. And through this long time, I realized something very clearly, that the field of economic competition is never boring, because it evolves with markets, with regulatory environment, with technologies and innovations, and even with the anti-competitive conduct. And as a commissioner, I have coordinated several aspects, important areas of Commission's work, such as market studies, merger control, state aid control, and international cooperation. And these experiences have shown me how essential is cross-institutional cooperation and dialogue for promoting competition policy. Now it is my great pleasure to welcome our distinguished speakers. We are joined today by Mr. Cosmin Belagurengo in person. Mr. Stephen Cooper and Lilian Santos Marquez Severino have kindly joined us remotely. Unfortunately, due to current circumstances, we had fewer speakers today for today's panel discussion than we hoped to have, but nevertheless, we are very glad and we are very lucky to have such distinguished speakers in our panel discussion. I would like to invite each of our speakers to briefly introduce themselves and share one key idea they would like to highlight during our discussion. Mr. Cosmin Belagurengo is member of board of the Romanian Competition Council. Thank you, Mr. Belagurengo, for joining us here in Armenia. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Shushan. For me, it's a great pleasure to be back in Yerevan. It's my third time in Armenia. I really enjoy your capital city and your country. A few words about me. I have been working for the Romanian Competition Authority since 2007. In 2007, Romania joined European Union. For 7 years, I was case handler within a competition department. Then I switched to state aid, because in Romania the competition authority deals with both competition and state aid. I coordinated the state aid department, and then I was appointed board member of the Romanian Competition Authority. In 2024, I was appointed for the second mandate, and a part of the daily decision of our decision-making body, so the involvement of the board members in the decision-making body. I also cover the international cooperation part. I am in charge of coordination of a twinning project dedicated to our colleagues from the Republic of Moldova, together with our colleagues from Poland and Lithuania. So those were a few words about me and my activity within the Romanian Competition Authority.
Thank you, Cosmin. Very impressive professional journey you have passed through these years in competition field. Now I would like to kindly invite Mr. Stephen Cooper the Counsel for International Antitrust at the U.S. Federal Trade Commission. Mr. Cooper is joining us remotely. Mr. Cooper, thank you for joining at this early time, early in the morning in U.S. The floor is yours, please.
Yeah, so I'm joining from the United States Federal Trade Commission, and I wanted to say thank you so much for having me on the panel, and thank you to the Competition and Consumer Protection Commission for the Republic of Armenia and the rest of the co-chairs for organizing this event. I apologize sincerely that I'm unable, but I'm honored to attend virtually, and I look forward to the discussion with all of you. I must also note that the views I express today are my own and not necessarily those of the FTC or any individual commissioner. So today, I plan to share some recent advocacy work with other governmental agencies that the FTC has engaged in, as well as a deregulatory effort in which we have dealt with many parts of the federal government in order to combat anti-competitive regulation. But before I dive in, I want to highlight that our advocacy efforts are important in part because they support our enforcement work. In the United States, the FTC, along with the Department of Justice Antitrust Division, enforce U.S. competition laws, and this enforcement is done because competitive marketplaces generate high level of innovation, productivity, and growth. While competition agencies at this workshop may employ a variety of approaches, in our experience, we have found that a case-by-case enforcement approach rather than a regulatory approach allows us to address specific anti-competitive harms without stifling innovation and pro-competitive conduct. I'm honored to be here, and I look forward to the discussion today.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Now I would like to pass the floor Mrs. Lilian Santos Marques Severino, who is the Chief Economist at CADE in Brazil, Administrative Council for Economic Defense. Mrs. Severino, it is a pleasure to welcome you. Thank you for joining us at this early time. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you very much, ICN, for the invitation. Unfortunately, I was not able to attend the workshop in person, but I'm very grateful to the opportunity to contribute the discussion remotely. I hope to have the chance to visit Armenia in near future. My name is Lilian, and I currently serve as a Chief Economist of the Department of Economic Studies in the Brazilian Competition Authority, CADE. I'm a former head of advisory unit of the Presidents of CADE, as well as former head of merger unit at the General Superintendence, and former Assistant Chief Economist in the Department of Economic Studies. Within CADE, the Department of Economic Studies, known as DE, functions as the authority specialized economic advisory body. Our main role is to provide technical economic analysis that supports CADE's activities in merger control, antitrust enforcement, and competition advocacy. Although the department does not have decision-making power, it plays an important role in ensuring the authority's decisions are grounded in sound economic reasoning and reflect up-to-date analytical approaches. In practice, the department prepares economic studies and technical opinions either on its own initiative or at the request of the tribunal, the president, or the general superintendent. Through this work, we aim not only to support individual cases, but also to continuously strengthen the analytical foundations of competition policy in Brazil. Beyond case-related work, the department is also actively engaged in competition advocacy and market studies. These initiatives seek to identify regulatory barriers, promote pro-competitive reforms, and foster a broader culture of competition across public institutions. As we will discuss today, fostering a culture of pro-competition policy goes beyond enforcement. It requires continuous dialogue with regulators, policymakers, and society. supported by solid economic analysis and evidence-based advocacy. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to hand the floor back to the moderator.
Thank you very much, Lilian. It was interesting to learn about your practice in CADI. I would like to smoothly pass to our questions next, to our main questions of the discussions. And now let us begin the discussion with the tools and mechanisms of advocacy, which is used in cooperation with public bodies in different agencies. Of course, advocacy can take many forms: formal opinions on draft legislation, sectoral studies, joint working groups, awareness-raising initiatives, and so on. And so my first question is, what tools and mechanisms do your agencies use in cooperation with state bodies, and what are the peculiarities of this work? Mr. Kozmin, I would like to invite you to the conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to briefly present to you which are our tools we use when it comes to advocacy. So we have a competition caravan. What does it mean, a competition caravan? Every year we visit at least 4 countries of Romania. Romania is divided into 41 countries. And there we have organized meetings with 3 target groups: the public administration, the business association, and with universities, where we have universities, because not every municipality in Romania has an university. Second tool is our involvement in the reviewing process of draft law initiated by the government. Then we have meetings in the parliament. We are invited in the parliament to defend our opinions when it comes to laws, draft laws initiated by the MTs, and it's quite challenging to go there, especially if we face representatives of opposition party which have, let's say, political interest or populist interest. It's very difficult to handle those situations. We also organize twice a year annual conferences. So in spring we organize a conference dedicated to presenting the result of the competition authority of the previous year. To these kind of conferences, we invite representatives of government, parliament, business association, law firms, all the stakeholders involved in competition issues. In autumn, we also organize a conference, and we choose 2 or 3 specific sectors of our economy, and we analyze the trends, the developments in that sectors. We also are involved in market studies. We do a lot of market studies. We issue, so at the end of a market study, we can initiate investigation for infringement of competition law, or we can issue recommendations, or both. We have a special department. It's not a department, it's a unit, a special unit which is in charge of monitoring the way the public bodies take into consideration our recommendation we make during the market studies. We also organize press conferences. For sure, at the beginning of the year, we organize a press conference where we try to disseminate to the press our results, and I think, and when we finalize off all the soft advocacy tools, we have another tools. According to our law, we have the power to initiate investigations against public bodies, public institutions in Romania for infringement of competition law. It is true that we don't have the power to impose fines, but we can impose mandatory measures. But it is true that the public authorities, they have the right to challenge our decision in the court, and this is the reason why our enforcement in this respect takes a lot of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It is very interesting to learn about Romanian practice in advocacy mechanisms. Now I would like to ask Mrs. Lilian about the tools and mechanisms used in Brazil. There were already an introductory, but we would like to learn more about the detailed forms of advocacy tools and mechanisms used in cooperation with public bodies. Mrs. Lilian, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the question, Susan. In Brazil, promoting a culture of pro-competition policy across the public sector require close and continuous cooperation between the competition authority and the other government bodies, particularly sector regulators. Many of the decisions that shape how markets work are taken in regulatory process. So if you want competition principles to be reflected in public policy, the competition authority needs to be actively engaged with those institutions. CADE relies on several advocacy tools and mechanisms to make this cooperation possible. First, an important instrument is the use of technical cooperation agreements, which establish formal channels for collaboration and information exchange between CADE and other public bodies. These agreements exist with regulators in sectors such as telecommunications, oil and gas, electricity, civil aviation, ports, etc., as well as with other public institutions such as central bank. These agreements allow institutions to share information, exchange technical expertise, and coordinate their work when competition issues arise in regulated sectors. In practice, this cooperation often takes the form of joint technical discussions, working groups, and consultation in complex cases where both regulatory and competition perspectives are relevant. Second, beyond these formal agreements, there is also continuous institutional dialogue. Our teams interact frequently with regulatory agencies through technical meetings, exchange of information, and discussions on market developments. This kind of day-to-day dialogue is extremely important because it helps ensure that competition concerns are considered early in the policy process. A third important tool is CADE's participation in public consultations on new regulations or regulatory reforms, or in draft law. When ministries and regulatory agencies propose new rules or any draft law, CADE can submit technical opinions assessing their potential impact on competition. This allows the competition authority to contribute to the policy making at an early stage, helping to prevent the adoption of unnecessary restrictive regulations. Another key instrument is the use of market studies and technical research. At CADE, these studies are mainly prepared by the Department of Economic Studies. They aim to identify regulatory barriers, structural bottlenecks, and other features that may restrict competition. These studies are then shared with policymakers and regulators and often serve as an analytical basis for discussions on regulatory reform. Finally, advocacy is also promoted through events and outreach initiatives. CADI regularly organizes seminars, workshops, and academic events together with regulators, universities, and other public institutions. These initiatives help disseminate competition principles and encourage dialogue among policymakers, regulators, and researchers. Taken together, these tools, cooperation agreements, institutional dialogue, participation in consultations, market studies, and joint events, help integrate competition considerations into public policymaking across different sectors. And I believe this kind of sustained cooperation is essential for building a strong pro-competitive culture within government. With that, I will stop here and turn back to Shushan. Thank you.
Thank you, Lilian. Very impressive and various tools we see that competition agencies use in their practice. For example, Romanian practice about very intensive workshops in competition sphere and different involvement in different stage public bodies activities, and the technical cooperation agreements in Brazilian experience is quite interesting. Let's see now the US perspective of the tools and mechanisms used in this area, and I will invite Stephen to contribute to this question. Stephen, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Thank you, Shushan. Speaking last on this question, it's interesting to hear about the tools that the U.S. has in similarity with Romania and Brazil, but also the differences. So I'll note that the FTC has a variety of tools which reflect a recognition that in addition to any competitive conduct and any competitive mergers, misguided regulations and state actions can also harm competition, including by entrenching incumbents, raising entry costs, and discouraging innovation. So I'll share some of the tools that the FTC has via means of an example of recent advocacy. The FTC has a group of attorneys responsible for advocacy with other state actors. These attorneys are part of the FTC's Office of Policy and Planning, and they report to FTC leadership and are tasked with, among other things, advocacy and submitting filings supporting competition principles to state actors, including state legislators, regulatory boards and officials, state and federal courts, and other federal agencies. In recent years, the FTC has led a multi-year effort to promote competition and innovation in the market for hearing aids, devices that amplify sounds for people with hearing loss. Following decades of FTC enforcement actions and studies in the space, as well as a government report detailing how there is unmet need and high costs due in part to complex state regulations restricting the distribution channels for hearing aids, the FTC engaged in numerous forms of advocacy, deploying many of the tools in our advocacy arsenal. First, and this type of advocacy was mentioned by Cosmin and Lilian, the FTC held a public workshop that brought together researchers, policymakers, and others to examine ways in which enhanced competition and innovation might increase the availability and adoption of hearing aids by those consumers who need them. An event like this allows the FTC to learn more, but also shows the public, other agencies, and related industries that this is a topic of importance that we are looking into. Additionally, the FTC sought comments via a request for information, or RFI. This is a process whereby we describe an issue and the topics and information along with any questions that we are considering and request public comments. We then hold the comment period open for a period, typically 30 to 60 days, and then a team of attorneys and economists will review the comments received. These efforts ultimately led to the FTC working with the US Food and Drug Administration and supporting a rule of theirs that would allow for some hearing aids to be sold over the counter by removing certain state restrictions that impede or even prevent the sale of over-the-counter hearing aids. In support of this rule, the FTC provided a public memo detailing our experience gained over decades from examining the provision of hearing aids from a competition perspective. The impacts of this rule are still being studied, but the intent and likely effect is to foster lower prices, increased availability, new innovation, and increased competition in markets for existing hearing aids. This matter highlights some of the advocacy tools that we use at the FTC and the importance of working together with other parts of the government, including the Food and Drug Administration, the Center for Disease Control, and the Department of Veteran Affairs, agencies that you wouldn't ordinarily think of when you think about competition, in order to reduce any competitive state barriers and promote competition. It also highlights the symbiotic nature of enforcement actions and advocacy efforts, as enforcement actions today can lead to future advocacy efforts and vice versa. With that, Shushan, I'll hand the floor back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As we could notice, there are very interesting tools and mechanisms used by FTC in cooperation with state bodies. For example, and quite an interesting tool is the request of public comments. It would be very interesting to hear more about the success stories of implementation of such kind of tool. Before moving to the next question, I would like to walk you through some perspectives from Armenian side about our tools and mechanisms which we used in advocacy policy. And first, and the most important tool, I would mention the market studies, the sector inquiries, because in this process, starting from the beginning and till the end and even beyond, we cooperate very closely with state authorities, and this takes a lot of time and efforts, but the results are the most meaningful, I think. Because throughout the entire process, from the selection of the sector to the analysis and the findings and even beyond the implementation of recommendations, the Commission maintains close cooperation. And once a study is completed, we work jointly with the public authorities to implement the recommendations, which often include proposals for development of regulatory legislation, because in this sense, the sector inquiries are the most important tools supporting the development of sector policy on the competitive basis. Another important mechanism I would like to mention is legislative cooperation. I would like to notice that our Commission does not have the legislative initiative, but this is not a problem at all, because we closely cooperate with the policy developer, the Ministry of Economy, and during this cooperation we have achieved meaningful results. I would like to mention that with the Ministry of Economy, which is responsible for shaping state policy in the competition, we always work together within joint working groups to develop competition legislation, bringing together the perspectives of policymaker and the enforcement. The Commission also provides opinions, official opinions on draft sectoral laws and other normative legal acts. This is similar with the RIAs, another advocacy tool we use in cooperation with state bodies. We provide RIAs on sectoral laws and regulations which can impact competition in cooperation with the Ministry of Economy. In addition, we also, as in Romanian practice, we also are introduced in high-level participation in decision-making process at the government. The chairperson of the Commission regularly participates in government sessions, meetings, and can provide an advisory opinion on the decisions. And of course, another advocacy tool which we exercise is within transparency and accountability. And each year, the Commission publishes its annual report, which contains analysis, statistical data, and this report is introduced in the National Assembly by the chairman. And finally, another interesting tool we sometimes use in the areas where competition concerns raised most frequently are development of the guidelines, because these documents, soft law documents, are useful not only for businesses but also for public bodies to avoid competitive concerns or to address them in time. This much about our main tools of advocacy, and Moving to our next question, I would like to mention that, of course, discussing these toolkits are extremely important, but even more valuable they are with the results, with the insights from the best practices which we achieve, which we faced during exercising of these tools and mechanisms. And I would like to invite our speakers to, in 2-3 examples, introduce the most successful cases they had during exercising advocacy tools with public bodies. And we will start with Cosmin, traditionally.
Yeah, thank you. But before answering your question, I want to make a comment regarding the previous question. Another tool we use in Romania is when the competition authority changes its own practice, or when we have the initiative, because we also don't have the legislative initiative, but when we want to modify the law, together with the Ministry of Economy, together we can initiate a project to modify the law. So when we change our practice and or when we want to modify our legislation, so we organize meetings with business associations and public bodies which are involved in that sector, and I think those kind of instruments are very fruitful for both sides. For us, because somehow we try to test their opinion. We need the public authorities and the business environment feedback, and in order to promote a provision in the law which doesn't force us to modify them afterwards. And now to give you a few successful examples, I want to elaborate more on the tools I have mentioned before. So our involvement in the reviewing of draft laws initiated by the government. The initiators of the laws are obliged by law to send us the draft laws with the potential anti-competitive impact. We analyze and issue advisory opinion to the initiator. It is true that our opinion is not binding for the initiator, but we establish a mechanism together with the Ministry of Justice, which is the last ministry in Romania which sign on a draft law before it is adopted by the government. And this informal mechanism make the initiator to take into consideration almost all our recommendations. So our successful rate is quite high, more than 90% of our observations are taken into consideration by the initiator. Another success story is the competition caravan I mentioned before. We go in the territory of Romania. We have meetings with the public authorities. It is important for us to speak with them, to listen to them, to try to find out which the local problems are, because usually from the capital city the perception of the reality is sometimes different than the reality. And this give us, so we try to teach them the ABC of competition. We have the same approach when it comes to meetings with the business associations. From our in our opinion, from the perspective of knowing competition rules, the companies in Romania are divided in two main categories. On one hand, there are multinational companies, so big companies which have the competition culture imported from their mother companies. They know almost everything about our activity. they are assisted by the biggest law firms in Romania, so they know everything about us. But on the other hand, we have small and medium enterprises, especially the ones who are not based in Bucharest, and the reality is that some of them, they don't know that price fixing or market allocation are infringement of competition law, and this is the area where we focus on disseminating the competition culture. Until now, this caravan, it's a success. The feedback we receive, it's quite good, and we try, if we get budgetary allocation, to spread this campaign. I mean, not to visit only 4 countries per year, to expand to, let's say, 6, 8 countries per year.
Thank you very much. The idea of competition caravan is very interesting, and I think that we also should think to implement in our practice as well more workshops. We were talking about this practice with colleagues as well. I would like to pass the floor to Mr. Cooper. Stephen, please introduce the most interesting, memorable success stories in cooperation with public bodies using advocacy tools and mechanisms. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Shushan. In terms of advocacy successes, I would like to share recent work that the FTC has been involved in to reduce anti-competitive government regulations, as this is a priority of the current administration. An April 2025 presidential executive order titled Reducing Anti-Competitive Regulatory Barriers directed the FTC and the Department of Justice to work with agency heads across the federal government to identify specific federal regulations that create anti-competitive barriers that could be narrowed or deleted. Specifically, the executive order targeted federal regulations that create monopolies or unnecessary barriers to entry, limit competition between competing entities, facilitate licensure requirements that limit competition, or otherwise impose anti-competitive restraints on the operation of the free market. In terms of tools, Shushan, this gets to your question for successes related to implementing requests for public comments, as the FTC's first step was to launch a request for information, or RFI, where the general public was given a 45-day window and invited to provide input on the identification of anti-competitive regulations. In this request, the FTC encouraged input from all members of the public, including consumers, workers, businesses, startups, potential market entrants, investors, and academics. This public input is critical as our work is strengthened as more people are brought into our work, and the sheer number of federal regulations makes it impossible for the FTC and DOJ to do this work alone. In response to this request for public information, the FTC and DOJ received over 500 comments, which were reviewed by their lawyers and economists. During this time, the FTC and DOJ also spent substantial time working with representatives across the government. I share this detail to highlight again the benefit of bringing together the public and other agencies to inform advocacy efforts, particularly when dealing with innumerable state regulations. This work led to the submission from the FTC chairman to the Office of Management and Budget with a list of over 125 and counting regulations that are recommended for repeal or modification. This work has already led to numerous successes. One example that I'll highlight relates to a proposed rule by the Consumer Product Safety Commission that would have required table saws to use finger detection technology. However, public reporting revealed that the regulation was proposed by the sole patent holder of the finger detection technology noted in the rule, and thus is an example of an incumbent company attempting to use state action to restrict entry and entrench their position. Ultimately, the Consumer Product Safety Commission withdrew the proposed rule, and so this is an example of how this advocacy effort has already led to success in deregulation. With that, Shushan, I'll hand the floor back to you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. It was interesting to learn about success stories in implementing advocacy tools and mechanisms, and why I particularly asked about the public opinions, because in Armenia this tool is exercised very broadly as well. Every draft legislative act is put in the special platform, e-draft platform, where the general public, where businesses can provide their opinions, and we then carefully work with every opinion to highlight, to justify, and maybe to change the draft legislative act before circulating. But within public bodies, I would mention that this tool does not work with public bodies, because every draft legislation is circulated separately to all the stakeholder public bodies, and they can provide opinions by this channel as well. I would like to furtherly invite Mrs. Lilian Severino to contribute to the most successful, interesting stories about implementing advocacy tools. Lilian, the floor is yours.
Of course, Shusha, I would be happy to highlight a few examples of competition advocacy in Brazil. I would like to focus on cases where the competition authority was able to influence regulatory or legislative reforms that improved market conditions in the lasting way. One example comes from the fuel sector. In 2018, we published a study called Rethinking the Fuel Sector, Pro-Competition Measures. The study identified several regulatory barriers that were limiting competition in fuel distribution and retail markets. Among other recommendations, it suggested allowing ethanol producers to sell directly to gas stations, removing restrictions on fuel imports by distributors, improving transparency about the ownership structure of fuel stations, and reviewing certain tax and regulatory arrangements that create inefficiencies in the market. Since then, several of these recommendations have been implemented through legislative and regulatory changes. For example, Brazil adopted a reform allowing ethanol producers to sell directly to gas stations, which reduces intermediation costs and improved logistics in the sector. Another important change was the removal of restrictions on fuel imports by distributors. In addition, tax reform simplified the collection of certain fuel taxes, reducing distortions in the supply chain. Last year, CADE published a follow-up assessment of this study. So the purpose of this document was precisely to review the regulatory developments since the original study and identified which of the recommendations has been implemented and which one still remain pending. This follow-up analysis confirmed that several pro-competitive reforms had been adopted in the sector, while also highlighting areas where further improvements are still needed, such as increasing transparency regarding economic links between fuel retailers. So this example illustrates an important dimension of advocacy, not only proposing reforms, but also monitoring their implementation over time, helping maintain the policy discussions and encourage further improvements in the regulatory framework. A second example related to the coordination with sector regulators in infrastructure markets, particularly telecommunications. In some merger cases involving network sharing agreements, CADE worked closely with the sector regulator to balance efficiency gains from infrastructure sharing with the need to preserve competition. In one recent case involving mobile network sharing, the transaction was approved subject to commitments designed to limit the geographic scope of the agreement, ensuring transparency, and prevent the exchange of competitively sensitive information. This type of coordinated approach illustrates how competition advocacy and enforcement can work together with sectoral regulators and address complex market structures while still preserving investment incentives. Overall, these examples show that advocacy can be particularly effective when it combines economic analysis, institutional cooperation, and evidence-based dialogue with policymakers. In many cases, the most durable impact of competition authority comes not only from enforcement decisions, but also from their ability to influence the design of policies and regulations to shape markets over the long term. The examples I mentioned are relatively recent ones, but Brazil also has a longer history of success advocacy initiatives. For instance, CADE worked together with OECD in a comprehensive competition assessment project in ports and civil aviation sectors, which resulted in hundreds of recommendations aimed to improving regulatory framework and reducing unnecessary barriers to competition. During the COVID pandemic, CADE also issued several advocacy opinions, warning about the risk associated with price controls and other restrictive measures that were being proposed in response to supply shortages. These contributions helped inform the policy debate and supported more market-oriented response. More recently, we have also been engaged in discussions with policymakers and regulators on emerging issues, such as the potential ex-ante regulation of digital platforms and the regulation of artificial intelligence. So these examples illustrate that advocacy is an ongoing process. It requires continuous dialogue with public authorities, careful economic analysis, and the ability to contribute constructively to policy debates as markets and technologies evolve. And with that, I am happy to turn back to Shusha. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lilian. It was interesting to learn about your success stories. And with this, let me also introduce to your attention several cases that come to my mind in the context of our conversations. As it was mentioned, in US, there was a study about assistive technologies. We had similar study in Armenia in 2022, and I would like to share the results of this study as a success story because we had really, I think, impressive results from this market study. Particularly, the ministry aimed to restructure the prosthetics and orthotics provision system to improve transparency and accessibility for users, while also ensuring a more efficient use of public resources allocated for assistive technologies. And following the study, the Commission presented a series of proposals and recommendations, many of which have already been implemented. Particularly, an electronic system for providing assistive technologies known as e-disability has already been introduced. This system platform significantly improves transparency in the procurement and distribution of assistive devices and strengthens consumer confidence in the sector. Because the platform is connected with the ministry's information system and ensures that the assistive devices offered meet internationally recognized standards of quality and functionality. Additionally, a memorandum of understanding was signed between the ministry and the Commission, outlining the Commission's role in providing expert advice on the validity of price proposals of the prostheses and orthoses submitted by the businesses. Another important study was conducted 2 years ago on online taxi services platforms. This is another important area because the legislation on electronic platforms was not developed at that time, and this was very important to have the legislative basis for the activities of the platforms. They were imposing themselves as only intermediaries between the businesses, between the consumers and the drivers, but this was not the reality. And this market study showed that the result of market study was the several regulatory improvements which were proposed. In particular, it was recommended to introduce the legal definition of electronic platform within the transport sector and to expand the regulatory framework to address services provided through digital platforms. The proposals also address the responsibilities of the platforms, the functioning mechanisms of the platforms and interaction between drivers, companies and digital platforms. Furthermore, it was recommended to introduce clear rules regarding both the presentation of information for consumers and the use of personal data within the platforms. And this was essential for the further developments of the regulations, which were partially based on our proposals. Another example I would like to introduce to your attention was an example of institutional cooperation between the Commission and the Ministry of Economy within the development of the last legislative packages in competition and consumer protection field. I'm happy to announce that in 2025 the Commission gained the powers of horizontal body for consumer protection, and the whole legislation, the first package and the second package, were developed in close cooperation in working groups with the Ministry of Economy, and now we are still in the process of drafting and improving this legislation in accordance with the European standards. Additionally, I would like to highlight one example about the guidelines I mentioned as a tool, and recently we have adopted a guideline on methodology for assessing anti-competitive activities of state bodies and their officials, which helps both public bodies and businesses avoid potential violations. This much about Armenian perspective, and smoothly moving to the next question interconnected with the success stories, I would like to suggest our speakers to share with us the challenges they faced during implementing these tools, because the perspective of policymakers and the enforcers often vary, and they do not this path does not always seem straightforward. So I would like to invite you to share with us what challenges have you faced during this work with public bodies, and inviting Cosmin, please.
Thank you, Shushan. One challenge we faced is so-called emergencies. Emergencies are the draft laws which are sent to us for reviewing today at 4 p.m. and the government wants our opinion to be ready the next day at 9 a.m. because it's a government meeting and only the competition council didn't send the opinion. As much as we try to lobby among the ministries, it doesn't matter of the color of the parties which form the government. Until now, what we achieved was to reduce the number of those kind of emergencies. We try to explain to the government that we need time to analyze their intention, and then if we see some problems to to try to identify solution, because this is other attribution of our institution, to try to fit their intention into state aid and competition regulation. So, as until now, what we succeeded is to reduce the number of those so-called emergencies. We actually developed a network of informal contacts. So for each ministry, we have case handlers which are allocated to each ministry. For example, for the Ministry of Energy, we have 4 case handlers, because Ministry of Energy nowadays in Romania is the biggest state aid grantor because of green energy state aid schemes. So, and we try to encourage them to contact us informally in advance, and together to try to find solutions. So this is one of the challenge. The second one is with the help of European funds, we developed a big data project. It's a big database. We succeeded to interconnect the database of Competition Authority with the database of Public Procurement Agency, together with Trade Register and other public institutions. And our goal, our objective was to try to use this kind of big, huge database to detect bid rigging cases or unnotified mergers. The problem we face now is we have the big database, but we don't have the IT specialist in order to design the algorithms which are mandatory to help us to find for example, bid rigging potential cases. I don't know how is in your countries. In Romania, an IT specialist is paid in private sector at least 4 times better than in public sector, and this is the reason why right now we don't have. So we have the database, but we don't have the algorithms. One of idea, but this is not the situation for the competition authorities, also for other public bodies in Romania, and we had some contacts with the government, and I think we convinced them to find a solution in order to allow us to pay better the IT specialist. Or another idea was to outsource, so to buy services of programming from the private sector. But here is another issue. So our legal department signaled us that we deal with very sensitive data, and we are not sure if the private entity is allowed to manage those kind of data. So those were the 2 challenges we have right now regarding our cooperation with other public bodies, and these relationships are covered by under the umbrella of our advocacy efforts.
Thank you, Cosmin. I would say that I fully share your challenges. We fully share, because the emergencies is the most relevant challenge that we face. But we think that we have already had the perspective of public bodies who start to require in a more long time our opinion, because in any case we do our analysis and provide additionally. So this is the same. And about the interoperability of the platforms, databases, I would like to mention that the same in Armenia. We have already interconnected to all the databases relevant for our work, the State Revenue Committee, the Registry for Entities, the Registry for cadastre and other relevant databases. And now we, in cooperation with the Ministry of Finance, are working on integrating some advanced searching mechanisms, advanced AI-driven tools in electronic procurement system to more operatively and more with less resources to identify the red lines in public procurement, to have more cases identified of infringement with infringement elements. I would like to pass the floor to Stephen to share with us the challenges if they face such in cooperation with public bodies advocacy implementation. Thank you, Stephen. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Shushan. Yeah, it's, I guess, you know, as a working for an enforcement agency, it's not a surprise to hear that, you know, tight time pressure and lack of resources are common challenges that our agencies face. Two challenges that I want to highlight today, though, are the first is that in our competition and deregulation work is simply the sheer number of government regulations that impact and have implications related to competition. You know, in our deregulatory work, the FTC has, you know, seen that all number of agencies promulgate regulations across many sectors of the government that can create barriers to competition and innovation. So just the sheer number of regulations is a challenge. And then another challenge that arises is the competing priorities that emerge when working with other agencies. At the FTC, promoting competition is our mandate and primary focus. However, the FTC doesn't operate in a vacuum and often interacts with other agencies with different mandates. One example that I'll share here is the FTC's recent advocacy work to combat state laws that unduly limit the work of certain advanced practice nurses or APRN nurses, and thus limit competition between physicians and these nurses. So APRN nurses are nurse practitioners with a graduate nursing degree and have been trained to provide a broad range of services, including the diagnosis and treatment of acute and chronic illnesses. But many states have these physician supervision requirements for APRN nurses that limit the types of patients APRN nurses may see or the procedures they may perform. And here it comes at the conflicting priorities. While the aim of these restrictions is safety and quality, the goal should be to avoid imposing restraints that may intend to impair competition in a way that is greater than necessary to address legitimate health and safety concerns. And so the FTC has done extensive work in this space to study competition in healthcare between physicians and these APRN nurses. In the past, the FTC has written and published a report detailing the policy perspectives at play on the competition and regulation of APRN nurses. And because of this work, numerous state legislatures have requested comment from the FTC on the likely competitive effects of proposed changes to APRN regulations and laws. And so that's just another challenge I wanted to highlight, just these competing priorities that agencies are dealing with, because, you know, competition is certainly one key component and is the mandate of an enforcement agency like the FTC, but recognizing that other state actors have you know, different priorities as well. So thank you, Shushan. I'll turn the floor back to you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And as we have not much time left, I would like to propose Lillian to comment shortly on the challenges they have faced in cooperation with state bodies advocacy procedure. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a very important question, because while competition advocacy can generate significant long-term benefits, it often involves navigating a number of institutional and practical challenges. In Brazil, competition advocacy has achieved important results, but it also comes with several challenges, particularly because many of the policy decisions that affect competition are taken outside the competition authority itself. A first challenge is the institutional complexity of regulated sectors. In many industries, such as energy, telecommunications, transport, or financial services, there are sector regulators with their own mandates and policy objectives. It's similar like Stephen just said. These objectives may include issues such as safety, universal service, environmental protection, or industrial policy. As a result, competition is not always the only consideration in regulatory decisions. This means that advocacy often requires a careful balancing of perspectives and continuous effort to explain how pro-competitive policies can also support broader public policy goals, such as efficiency, innovation, and consumer welfare. In this context, cooperation with regulators and respect for institutional mandates are essential. A second challenge concerns access to data and information, which can be particularly important to advocacy and market studies. For example, in the fuel sector, some of the recommendations made by CADI in early studies highlighted the importance of improving transparency and access to information that could help detect anti-competitive practices. While progress has been made, access to certain types of fiscal or transactional data remains limited, which can make it more difficult to identify potential competition issues in an early stage. A third challenge relates to a political and legislative environment in which many advocacy issues discussions take place. Competition authority often provide technical recommendations on proposed legislation or regulatory reforms or draft laws. But the final decisions are made by policymakers, who just must consider a wide range of economic, social, and political factors. As a result, some pro-competitive recommendations may take time to be adopted or may only be partially implemented. This is why follow-up work is so important. This type of follow-up helps maintain the policy discussion and encourage further reforms. Finally, another challenge is related to new and fast-moving markets, particularly in the digital economy. Issues such as digital platforms, data access, or artificial intelligence raise complex questions that often requires coordination between competition authorities, regulators, and other public institutions. In this area, the challenge is not only to address current competition concerns, but also to help design regulatory frameworks that remain flexible and pro-competitive as technologies evolve. I think these are some challenges we have to face in advocacy efforts. So I will pause here and hand the floor back to Shusha. Thank you.
Thank you for your valuable insights, Lilian. Now I would suggest to pause here and to give the floor to our distinguished audience to ask questions they may have during our conversation, during our discussion. We will be happy to answer them. Please, 5 minutes for questions and answers.
Yeah, Cosmin, thank you very much for this set of contributions. I think, Cosmin, you mentioned that you are also in touch with the central bank, right, of Romania, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, okay, then let me see. That was one of the other. Yeah, that's true. But yeah, I wanted to link up precisely with that. But okay.
My question to our friend from Georgia was.
Okay. Then it was to Lilian. I apologies to that. Yeah. So the central bank, you are in touch with them as well in certain issues. I suppose it has to do with the banking sector and the competition in the banking sector. In the previous breakout section, we also had a discussion about the difficulty. I think it came from the Georgian experience, right, which was very interesting, where the situation was, if I understand and recall correctly, that yes, competition agencies have a role to play, but clearly there is the precedence of the key objective of the central bank, which is price and monetary stability. And I was wondering towards, so it's Lilian, I think, who then probably made that comment, whether that is sort of the same setting and constraint that you face in that particular sector. And maybe then the question to all the panelists is, do you experience similar hierarchy in other domains? Be it, for instance, also healthcare, or maybe even education or culture, media. That would be interesting, I think, to learn the limits of, let's say, the competition agency in its enforcement. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you for your question. In Romania, we don't have the limitation of enforcing of competition law like our colleagues in Georgia. So we had two investigations regarding the banks which are active in Romania. Investigation, at the end of it, we imposed the fines. So the National Bank of Romania is in charge of the monetary policy. So we are in charge of enforcing the competition law. What we do, when we initiate an investigation regarding the bank system or regarding the insurance sector, we have constant exchange of information. No, I wouldn't say information. We have consultations with the regulatory body. It's the same situation with the energy regulator. But we are in charge of enforcing the competition law in each sector of Romanian economy.
I would like to also reflect and introduce Armenian perspective. Armenian competition legislation does not sectoral limitations. It is implied to the financial sector equally as in other sectors. But there are, of course, some specific characteristics, peculiarities that we should have in mind when conducting investigation or reviewing a merger in this sector. We stay in close cooperation with the sector regulator. Exchange of information and drafting bylaws in this sector, we do with close cooperation with the central bank, and this is mentioned in the law, but there is no exclusion of the competition legislation from the financial sector in Armenia. Thank you.
And more comment from my side. When I told you that we have consultation with the national bank or to the energy regulator, but those consultations take place only after we initiate the investigation and after we finalize the inspections, the down rates. So not before.
I would like to ask our online speakers whether they would like to answer the question, reflect their opinion.
I can add some thoughts. In Brazil, we have a long and close cooperation with the central bank. This cooperation leads to a joint agreement that defines the responsibilities of each institution. In merger cases, for example, both authorities analyze the transactions, but with different perspectives. CADE focus on competition issues, while the central bank examines prudential and financial stability aspects. And if they find a prudential or financial stability risk, for example, we agreed that the competition issues can be relatively considered, because the financial and prudential risk is more complex and very important for the social welfare. But I think there is no example yet that we need to use this kind of joint agreement for this case, like finding a prudential risk. And I think it's some thoughts from Brazil.
And I'll just add from the U.S. that, I think this is a great question, and it gets to the challenge that Lillian and I discussed with the competing priorities. And so, I'll just note that, when working with other agencies, whether it's the central bank or, whoever it may be, it's, as competition enforcers, our perspective is to share the competition perspective and to support restrictions that are, minimally restrictive, while understanding that there may be competing priorities to implement.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Then I guess we can move to the closing of our today's panel. And with this regard, I would suggest our distinguished speakers to deliver one key takeaway that they would like to highlight in the closing and assuming today's discussion. And Cosmin, the floor is yours.
The final thought. I think in advocacy matters, the essential thing is communication. How you communicate, disseminate the competition culture, and how you find the entities who really need to be in the room to listen to what the competition experts have to say. This is to give you only an example. We do advocacy or promoting competition even during the down rates. For example, we encourage companies to apply for leniency or to settle with us. In Romania, settlement it's a very popular tool which is used by the undertakings which are investigated by the Romanian Competition Authority. It's a win-win tool for them because they get a reduction of the fine up to 30%, and for us we don't need to allocate so much resources to finalize the cases. And another important thing is if they settle with us, the companies they don't challenge our decision in the court. If they decide to challenge, they lose the benefit of the reduction. So communication. This is my last word regarding this panel.
Thank you. Stephen, the floor is yours for the keynote takeaway.
Thank you, Shushan, and thank you so much for allowing me to participate in this discussion. My intent was to highlight some of the advocacy and deregulatory work that the FTC has been engaged in as we work with other state actors to promote competition principles and remove any competitive barriers. And I just want to note that, the work that I've highlighted, and Lillian and Cosmin as well, today speaks directly to the importance of the ICN Advocacy Working Group and workshops like this, as it is critical for enforcement agencies to advocate for the dissemination of competition principles using whatever advocacy tools are readily available in your jurisdiction in order to promote the development of a culture of competition and the removal of any competitive state barriers. Again, thank you so much for having me today, and it was a pleasure to be here virtually, and again, I'm sorry that I wasn't able to attend in person.
Thank you, Stephen. It is a great pleasure to have you joined to today's discussion, and I would like to pass the floor to Lilian to deliver her keynote takeaway.
Thank you very much. Before we close, I would like to briefly thank you, Shushan, for guiding this discussion, and also my fellow colleagues, Cosmin and Steven, for their very insightful contributions. It has been a real pleasure to exchange views with all of you. And if I may highlight one final point from the Brazilian perspective, it will be the importance of competition advocacy as a continuous and collaborative process. Many of the most significant barriers to competition do not necessarily arise from private conduct alone, but from the way regulations and public policy are designed. For that reason, competition authorities can play a valuable role by contributing economic analysis, market studies, and technical recommendations that help policymakers consider the competitive effects and on their decisions. This type of engagement does not replace regulation or policy making, but rather complements it by ensuring that competition considerations are part of the broader policy debate. In Brazil, we have seen that sustainable dialogue with regulators, ministries, and other public institutions can gradually strengthen a pro-competition culture in government decision-making, which ultimately benefits markets, innovation, and consumers. So I will stop here, and by once again thanking ICN and my fellow panelists for this excellent discussion.
Thank you very much, Lilian. On the rights of moderator, I would like to conclude today's discussion by thanking our distinguished speakers, our distinguished auditory for rich and nuanced discussions we had today. As a keynote, I would like to say that the advocacy nowadays is not merely a complementary to the enforcement. It is a separate function of competition agencies, which provides expert advice to policymakers, which deters infringements, which raises awareness among all market participants, among public bodies. And especially, I would conclude this session with a metaphoric comparison. With the advocacy in public sector, I think it is similar to the quiet gardener, which removes the obstacles of regulation that hinder competition and cultivate necessary conditions for markets to grow and flourish. Thank you very much for your discussions, for your insights. Thank you.